Donald Trump taking the stand. The former president called to testify in the New York civil fraud trial, testifying under oath for 5 hours. NBC News reporting his rage came out on the stand today and that he seemed restless while also losing his composure as he lashed out at the judge. Trump saying the judge, quote, called me a fraud and he didn't know anything about me. Well, to be clear, he did not call him a fraud, but that did not stop Donald Trump from being Donald Trump. He also said to the judge, quote, you believe this political hack back there, referring to Attorney General Letitia James, and that's unfortunate. NBC News detailing he was, quote, losing it on the witness stand. And when he finished his outburst, the AG's lawyer asked him, quote, done? To which Trump replied, done. The only thing that I wish in that moment that the Attorney General's attorney would have asked him was, are you finished or are you done? That would have just really made my night, but he didn't. Despite Trump's antics, he actually made some major admissions about the fraud allegations on the stand. When he was asked by the lawyer from the AG's office if he ever thought, quote, the values were off in your statement of financial condition, Trump replied, quote, yes, on occasion, both high and low. Now, at one point, Donald Trump even agreed that the financial statements that were used to induce banks to lend money. See, and this is a point that's really important because it's key to the Attorney General's case against the former president and his organization. And earlier in the day, Donald Trump slamming the trial as he walked into court. Let's take a listen.
It's a very unfair situation. This is really election interference. That's all it is. This trial is ridiculous. It's very unfair. But in the meantime, the people of the country understand it, they see it, and they don't like it. They don't like it because it's political warfare, as you would call it, or political lawfare.
Now, when reporters asked how the trial was going, Trump made a motion that was essentially zipping his lips. Attorney General James responding after Trump was excused for the stand for them today, basically saying the following.
Mr. Trump obviously can engage in all of these distractions, and that exactly what he did, what he committed on the stand today. But I will not be bullied. I will not be harassed. This case will go on.
Trump's defense team chose not to cross-examine him after the Attorney General's office was done. Now, joining me to discuss all of this is Neal Katyal, former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Christy Greenberg, former prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. I just want to get right into this. Neal, I asked Nicole before we got off, and I'm going to ask you, was this the Donald Trump that you expected to hear take the stand today?
So first of all, I just want to say, Charles, it's a delight to see you in the chair. So great to see you there, my friend. I was not surprised because, you know, Trump did what he always did. He does cover a lot of ground. He attacked the lawyers. He attacked the New York Attorney General. He attacked the judge. But for all of his attacks, there was one key thing missing from Trump's testimony, which is any semblance of a colorable defense. And that is Donald Trump through and through. It's bloviating, it's distraction and the like. And that's why you saw this kind of crazy antics and behavior. He was not acting like any litigant I've ever seen in any courtroom, let alone someone who's a former high-ranking government official. I mean, he was rude, he was obnoxious, he was trying to provoke the judge. And look, you know, Charles, as you know, I've represented murderers and white-collar criminals. I've never seen anyone behave like this in a courtroom. They respect the court, they respect the process. The one last thing I'd say about your question is, in a way, Trump was successful today by his metric, because we're talking more about his behavior and his temper tantrums than we are about the fact that the guy committed serious fraud. So it's a distraction technique, and in some ways it's working. It obviously won't work in the court of law, though.
Neal, I'm going to borrow a phrase from the former president that we've heard him say a lot in terms of your answer, and that's, I've never seen anything like it. In practicing as a trial attorney, I have never seen anything like this in terms of a witness on the stand in court. But Christy, I want to pick up where Neal left off. Essentially, do you think that he did more damage to his case with respect to his testimony, or is there some silver lining that we're all missing that may mean that he did something positive or that he can turn into a win for himself?
You know, it should have been a lot more damaging for him than it was. Like you said, I've never seen anything like this before. It seemed like a scene out of My Cousin Vinny. There's the point in My Cousin Vinny where, the judge says to Vinny, "You're giving me an attitude." And he said, "Oh, so what? What else is new?" And what happens after that? The judge holds him in contempt and throws him in jail for the night. That's what would happen to any other defendant who acted this way, who was calling the judge extremely hostile, who was, rolling his eyes and making snide remarks the whole time, attacking the judge, attacking the AG. I mean, it was really outrageous behavior, and it would be a comedy if it wasn't so tragic that he's able to get away with that when no other defendant, no other witness in any other trial would be able to.
Neil, I want to point out, of course, this is already a civil trial. It's a bench trial. There is no jury. There are no cameras in the courtroom. His freedom is not at stake in terms of whether he will go to jail. The judge has already ruled on summary judgment. You have all of these things that I want to remind the audience of because this is very different than any of the other cases that he's currently facing. However, for anyone who's watching who says maybe this is a preview for what we can expect to see from Donald Trump, whether it's Fani Willis or whether it's Jack Smith, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think your point about this being a bench trial is really important because Trump's techniques today might have worked if there was a distraction of a jury involved that doesn't know exactly what kind of testimony is relevant or something like that. But this is a bench trial overseen by a highly trained judge who knows what to listen for, and Trump did himself no favors today. The one way in which I think it might bear on Jack Smith and the other things, to the extent that Trump took the stand, which I just don't think he ever would in a criminal case. But, Trump is so egotistical. And I think that's where James's attorneys today really had some purchase because Trump himself wanted to brag that he was in the room, that he actually had a lot to do with the valuations, even though, the prior defense strategy was all these real estate stuff was done by other people, not by Trump. Trump started bragging about his role and then was forced to acknowledge that he had overvalued some properties. So his ego essentially did him in today. To the extent we could get him to testify in a criminal trial, I think the same thing would happen, but I doubt that that would happen. I don't think any lawyer would let Donald Trump testify in a criminal matter.
I've been putting my smart money on the idea that he will not be taking this stand in any of his criminal trials, and I am pretty confident in standing by that, along with most lawyers that I know. Christy, let's talk nuts and bolts. So the prosecutor was able to elicit some admissions from Donald Trump about the fact that, number one, he was aware that there were some valuations that were inaccurate. He claimed to be both low and high. What do you make of that? How helpful or harmful do you think that will be to his individual defense?
Well, some of those he had to acknowledge, like Trump Tower, for example. The evaluation there dealt with a size that was 3 times larger than what it was. And, just think of anybody who's applying to a bank for a loan and says, well, here's my asset, here's my house or my apartment, and it's 3 times bigger than what it is, and the valuation is 400% larger than what it actually is. That's not accounting principles. That's not complicated accounting dealings. That's just plain fraud. And it was very clear that he had to acknowledge that was fraud. Right. And so he says it's a mistake. That's how he gets away with it. It was just a mistake. I don't know what happens there. It's like, that's not a mistake. That's a huge, huge difference. That's egregious is what it is.
Neil, I got to ask you, to the extent that there have been other witnesses, whether currently or in the past, so you have Weisselberg, who's basically taken a plea, and then you have in this trial another witness who has basically sort of said that they are also partly responsible for some of these missed evaluations as far as these documents. To what extent do you think that also may provide cover for Donald Trump and the rest of the Trump organization, namely his children?
Yeah, it might have provided some cover. That was the defense that they were trying to go with, which was Trump was kind of out of the loop on this stuff. Right. But today his ego got the best of him. And, he admitted to being involved in all this stuff and signing all these certifications and effectively lying in all these certifications. And there's a reason why we ask people to stop put their name on things. It's because they have to stand by what they signed. And Trump's defense today was, well, the bank still got a good deal. I paid them back for their loans. But the point of what the New York Attorney General is saying is, no, the banks all got a raw deal, because if you lie about your assets and say you have a lot more, then you're going to get a lower interest rate. The banks would have charged him a much higher interest rate if he told the truth. And sure, he eventually paid the loans back, but he never paid the higher interest rate back. That's the claim that the New York Attorney General is making. I heard zero answer from that today. And if anything, what today confirmed is that Trump was involved in this scheme.